Today, we pause to honor four extraordinary lives whose legacies helped shape our modern world, each from a different walk of life, yet all bound by courage, vision, and impact. From the boardrooms of global business to the quiet halls of science, from the heart of American politics to the timeless struggle for personal redemption, their stories remind us how greatness is often forged in perseverance. As we remember Oscar Wyatt, Virginia Joan Kennedy, Carolyn Cheeks Kilpatrick, and Sir John Gurdon, we reflect not only on what they achieved, but on how their lives continue to ripple through generations. These are not just obituaries, they are echoes of lives well lived and lessons never forgotten. It was a quiet morning in Houston when the news broke. Oscar Wyatt, the Texas oilman who once symbolized the grit and ambition of an entire generation, had passed away. He was 101. For those who knew his story, the name alone carried the weight of history, a man whose life seemed carved from the very earth he once drilled. Born in Beaumont, Texas in 1924, Wyatt came from modest roots. His father was a mechanic, his mother a homemaker. Times were hard, but even as a boy, Oscar showed an uncommon drive. He often said that growing up poor didn't break him, it built him. That hunger would later define the man who rose from a small-town farm to the highest ranks of American business. During World War II, Wyatt served as a bomber pilot, earning decorations for bravery. Friends remembered that he carried that same courage into every part of his life. "Once you've flown through fire," he once said, "no storm in business can shake you." Those words summed up his life's approach. Fearless, determined, and unrelenting. After the war, Wyatt turned his attention to the oil business. In 1955, he founded the Coastal Corporation, starting with just a single gas station. Over the next few decades, he transformed it into one of the most powerful independent energy companies in America. His style was bold, his decisions sharp, and his instincts rarely failed him. People who worked with him described him as demanding but loyal. He would walk through refineries himself, talking to workers, shaking hands, and asking direct questions. He understood every inch of his business, from the pipeline to the boardroom. His reputation grew not just as a businessman, but as a fighter who refused to bow to anyone, even the largest oil giants. In many ways, Oscar Wyatt represented the old-school Texas spirit, tough, proud, and unapologetically individualistic. Yet his journey wasn't without controversy. In the early 2000s, Wyatt faced legal challenges over the United Nations Oil for Food program in Iraq. The case drew headlines nationwide, and in 2007, he stood trial in federal court. It was a difficult chapter in an otherwise remarkable career. Some saw it as a fall from grace. Others saw it as the story of a man who never played by anyone's rules but his own. Wyatt accepted responsibility, served his time, and then quietly returned home to Texas. There, he lived out his later years surrounded by family and the land that had shaped him. His wife, Lynn Wyatt, a well-known Houston philanthropist, once said in an interview, "Oscar was larger than life, sometimes too large, but he was always true to himself." That truth, for better or worse, became the foundation of his legacy. On social media, tributes poured in from across the oil industry. "A legend has left us," wrote one energy executive. "He taught us that ambition and integrity can coexist, even in the toughest business." Others remembered his generosity, often unseen by the public. Wyatt quietly donated to hospitals, veterans' causes, and disaster relief, rarely asking for recognition. Despite his immense wealth, those close to him said he never lost the straightforward manner of a Texas rancher. He preferred plain talk to polished words and hard work to fancy appearances. "Oscar believed that your word was your contract," said one former employee. "If he gave you his hand, that was enough." As the decades passed, Wyatt witnessed the transformation of the oil industry he helped build. He saw new technologies, global crises, and shifting public attitudes. Through it all, he remained outspoken, sometimes controversial, always candid. He believed in American energy independence, often warning that the nation's strength depended on its own resources. Those who interviewed him in his later years often noted his sharp memory and quiet humor. He spoke fondly of flying, of his wartime comrades, and of his pride in seeing younger generations carry on the business he helped pioneer. "The world moves fast," he said in one of his final interviews, "but the values that built it, hard work, courage, and faith, never go out of style." His story, though deeply tied to the oil fields of Texas, stretched far beyond them. It was about resilience, about rising from the dust of the Great Depression to become a symbol of American enterprise. For many, Wyatt's life was proof that ambition could still create opportunity, even in the most unlikely places. In Houston, the skyline glowed a little dimmer on the night of his passing. Local news stations reflected on his contributions, describing him as a Texas original, one of the last of a generation that believed in building, not just buying. One longtime friend shared a simple tribute. Oscar wasn't perfect, but he lived. He really lived. And he never forgot where he came from. That sentiment echoed across the state, from the oil fields of West Texas to the boardrooms of Houston. Wyatt's life embodied the contradictions of greatness, success and struggle, pride and humility, ambition and reflection. In the days following his death, those close to him held a small private service. It was said to be quiet, dignified, and deeply Texan, just the way he would have wanted. A folded American flag rested beside his portrait, honoring the soldier who once took to the skies long before he conquered the earth. As the sun set over the Texas plains, one could almost imagine his voice, steady and sure, reminding us that the measure of a person is not in what they own, but in what they overcome. Oscar Wyatt's story will be remembered as a testament to perseverance and the enduring power of vision. He was a man who lived by his own compass, followed his own path, and left behind a legacy built not just on oil and steel, but on sheer willpower. And as Texas bids farewell to one of its most formidable sons, his life reminds us that even in an ever-changing world, the spirit of determination, the kind that built nations and shaped destinies, still burns bright. He will be remembered not only as the Maverick millionaire, but as the man who showed that the American dream, in all its complexity, was still worth chasing. It was a gentle morning in Cape Cod when the news quietly spread. Virginia Joan Kennedy, the first wife of Senator Ted Kennedy and a figure of grace in one of America's most storied families, had passed away. She was 89. To the world, she was Joan Kennedy, the elegant woman who stood beside history. But to those who knew her, she was far more than a name in a dynasty. She was a woman of courage, faith, and resilience. Born Virginia Joan Bennett in 1936, she grew up in a loving Irish-American family in New York. From an early age, her world revolved around music, faith, and family values. She studied piano at Manhattanville College, where her quiet intelligence and charm caught attention long before her last name would make headlines. In the late 1950s, her life changed forever when she met a young, ambitious politician named Edward Ted Kennedy. Their meeting, as friends would later say, felt like a scene out of a dream, full of hope, youth, and promise. In 1958, they married, and Joan became part of America's most powerful political family. Life in the Kennedy world was dazzling but demanding. There were cameras, headlines, and expectations, all weighing on a woman who had once preferred calm over chaos. Yet she carried it all with dignity. Those who met her during those years often spoke of her kindness and grace. She had a warmth that made everyone feel welcome, recalled a former family friend. Through countless public events and personal trials, Joan Kennedy became a symbol of composure. She stood beside her husband during his Senate campaigns and through moments of national grief. The tragedies that struck the Kennedy family were felt deeply by her too. The assassinations of President John F. Kennedy and Senator Robert F. Kennedy changed the course of their lives. Behind the public smiles, Joan faced her own private battles. Over the years, she struggled with alcoholism and health challenges, struggles she later spoke of openly, turning her pain into purpose. In 1992, she published The Joy of Classical Music, a book that reflected her lifelong love for art and melody. It wasn't just a book about music. It was a message about healing and finding beauty again after loss. Her marriage to Ted Kennedy eventually ended in 1982, after more than 2 decades together. The separation marked a turning point in her life. She stepped away from the political spotlight and began focusing on recovery and advocacy. Joan became a quiet champion for mental health and addiction awareness, sharing her story to help others find hope. Those close to her often spoke of her strength in silence. Joan had a gentle resilience, said one longtime friend. She didn't fight loudly. She endured, and she forgave. Even in her later years, she remained deeply connected to her family. Her children, Kara, Edward Jr., and Patrick Thedder, were the center of her world. Her son, former Congressman Patrick Kennedy, once said, My mother showed me that compassion is the heart of recovery. She lived it every day. In public tributes following her passing, many remembered her not only as a Kennedy, but as a woman who faced life's storms with grace. On social media, messages of condolence came from across the country. She carried herself with dignity through unimaginable times, wrote one post. Joan Kennedy reminded us that behind every public figure is a private soul fighting unseen battles. Her friends in Boston described her as soft-spoken and deeply spiritual. She attended church regularly and often found peace by the sea, watching the waves roll in, as if in quiet conversation with the past. One neighbor shared, "She loved the sound of the ocean. It gave her comfort. I think it reminded her that life moves on, even after heartbreak." As she aged, Joan withdrew from public life, spending her final years in the care of family and close friends. Yet her presence lingered, in the memories of those who saw her as a symbol of grace amid adversity. The Kennedys have known both triumph and tragedy, but Joan's story stands apart for its quiet courage. She didn't seek power or fame. She sought peace. Her legacy is not written in political victories or public speeches. It lives in her example of empathy and endurance. Reporters who once covered the family often recalled that Joan brought a rare softness to the Kennedy image. She smiled easily, spoke kindly, and had an ability to see good in others, even when she was hurting. That quiet humanity made her unforgettable. As the nation reflects on her life, one can almost imagine her at the piano, her fingers moving gently over the keys, her face calm, her spirit unbroken. Music was her language, and through it, she found her way back to light. A family statement read, "Joan Kennedy lived with faith, compassion, and love. She taught us that forgiveness and kindness are stronger than pain." That message seems to sum up her entire journey, one that moved from the bright glare of history to the quiet glow of healing. She faced the world's expectations, its heartbreak, and its judgments, and still found a way to rediscover herself. In remembering Virginia Joan Kennedy, the world recalls not the scandals or the sorrow, but the strength behind the smile, the way she stood tall when life seemed unbearable, the way she gave others hope simply by surviving. As the sun sets over Cape Cod and the wind carries the sound of the sea, her story gently closes, a story of grace, endurance, and redemption. She will be remembered not only as part of America's most famous family, but as a woman who reminded us that even in the shadow of power, the greatest legacy can still be love, faith, and quiet strength. It was a quiet morning in Detroit when the news broke. Former Congresswoman Carolyn Cheeks Kilpatrick had passed away. She was 80 years old. For many in Michigan and across the nation, her name carried weight, not just as a politician, but as a woman who gave her life to service. The city she loved, the city she fought for, now mourned one of its strongest voices. Carolyn Cheeks Kilpatrick was born on June 25, 1945, in Detroit, Michigan. Raised in a working-class family, she understood from a young age the struggles faced by ordinary people. Education became her way forward. After earning her degree from Western Michigan University and later a master's from the University of Michigan, she chose to dedicate her life to teaching. Before politics, she was in the classroom, guiding young minds, believing that the power to change a community began with education. In the 1970s, her passion for people led her to public office. She was first elected to the Michigan House of Representatives, where she quickly earned respect for her intelligence and determination. Those who worked with her described her as sharp, disciplined, and deeply caring. She didn't shout to make a point. She worked tirelessly to make one. By 1996, her journey took her to Washington, D.C., where she was elected to the United States House of Representatives. Representing Detroit and Michigan's 13th District, she served 7 terms in Congress. For more than a decade, she became a fierce advocate for jobs, education, and urban renewal. Her colleagues remember her as a strong, steady presence on Capitol Hill, a leader who never forgot where she came from. "Carolyn carried Detroit with her," said one former congressional aide. "Every vote she cast, every bill she sponsored, she thought about the families back home." Throughout her career, she focused on bringing opportunities to the communities that had long been overlooked. She championed funding for schools, supported programs for small businesses, and worked to expand access to affordable housing. To her, politics wasn't about power, it was about purpose. Still, her time in Washington was not without challenge. Like many public figures, she faced criticism, scrutiny, and political opposition. But those close to her say she faced it all with quiet strength. Carolyn never gave up, said a longtime friend. Even when people turned away, she kept her head high and kept working for the people who needed her. After leaving Congress in 2011, Kilpatrick remained active in community affairs. She continued to mentor young leaders and support civic causes in Detroit. For her, leadership wasn't a title, it was a lifelong commitment. She often spoke about faith and perseverance, reminding others that public service was not about the spotlight, but about making a difference even in small ways. Her son, Kwame Kilpatrick, former mayor of Detroit, shared an emotional tribute following her passing. "My mother taught me that leadership begins at home," he said. She believed that love and service could heal anything, a family, a neighborhood, a nation. Across social media, tributes poured in from former colleagues, educators, and community members. She broke barriers for women of color in politics, one post read. "Detroit is better because she cared." Another message simply said, "She opened the doors that others now walk through." Those who knew her personally remember her not only for her political achievements, but for her kindness. She was known to call constituents directly, listen to their struggles, and try to help however she could. One Detroit resident recalled, "I once wrote to her office about my daughter's school. A week later, she called me herself. That was who she was. She listened." Even outside the public eye, Carolyn was deeply committed to her faith. She attended church regularly and often spoke about God's role in guiding her through both triumph and hardship. Friends say that faith gave her peace in later years, and the wisdom to look back on her journey with gratitude. As news of her death spread, local stations replayed clips from her speeches. Her calm voice, her confident tone, and her steady belief in Detroit's future. "Our city's best days are still ahead," she once said. "But they will only come if we stand together and believe in each other." Those words now echo like a promise, one she kept through decades of service. Her legacy lives not only in legislation or headlines, but in the thousands of lives she touched. As one former student shared online, "Mrs. Kilpatrick taught me in high school before she became famous. She told us, don't wait for change, be the change." I never forgot that. For Detroit, Carolyn Cheeks. Kilpatrick was more than a representative. She was a reflection of its spirit, resilient, faithful, always fighting for better days. She walked the same streets as her constituents, felt their struggles, and used her voice to give them hope. In her final years, she remained devoted to her family and her community. She often attended local events quietly, smiling as younger leaders carried on the work she had started. She was proud, said a community activist. Not of her fame, but of her city. She loved Detroit with her whole heart. Her passing marks the end of an era, one built on persistence, integrity, and love for people. Yet her influence continues in every young woman who dares to enter public service, in every teacher who inspires a child to dream, and in every Detroiter who refuses to give up. As the sun sets over the skyline she helped shape, Detroit remembers Carolyn Cheeks Kilpatrick, not only as a congresswoman, but as a mother, mentor, and servant of the people. Her life reminds us that true leadership is not measured by how loudly we speak, but by how deeply we care. And so, with gratitude and respect, the city says goodbye to one of its brightest lights. A woman whose courage gave voice to a community and whose legacy will continue to echo through generations. She will be remembered as the voice of Detroit's hope, strong, compassionate, and unwavering in her belief that progress always begins with the people. It was a calm autumn morning in Cambridge when the news was confirmed. Sir John Gurdon, the Nobel Prize-winning biologist whose work transformed modern medicine, had passed away. He was 92. For many in the scientific world, his name was synonymous with discovery, a man whose quiet curiosity changed how humanity understands life itself. Born on October 2, 1933, in Dippenhall, England, John Bertrand Gurdon grew up fascinated by nature. As a child, he spent hours collecting insects and observing the smallest details of life. Yet his early journey was far from smooth. At school, one teacher famously wrote that John's dream of becoming a scientist was ridiculous and that he would never succeed. Those words might have broken some. But for Gurdon, they became a lifelong motivation. He would later hang that same school report on his laboratory wall. a daily reminder that failure could be the first step toward greatness. It was a simple gesture, but one that perfectly captured his spirit: humble, determined, and quietly defiant. In the 1950s, after studying zoology at Oxford, Gurdon began a series of experiments that would forever alter biology. At a time when most scientists believed that mature cells could not change their identity, he dared to question it. Working with frog eggs, he replaced their cell nuclei with those from adult frog cells. And astonishingly, the embryos still developed into healthy tadpoles. This discovery, that mature cells could be reprogrammed, laid the foundation for cloning and regenerative medicine. Decades later, his work would inspire research that led to stem cell breakthroughs, offering hope to millions suffering from diseases once thought incurable. In 2012, nearly half a century after his first experiments, Sir John Gurdon shared the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine with Japanese scientist Shinya Yamanaka. Together, their work proved that the story of a cell's life could be rewritten, that biology itself was not fixed, but full of possibility. At the Nobel ceremony in Stockholm, Gurdon spoke with characteristic modesty. "Science," he said, "is about persistence, the belief that a question is worth asking even if no one else believes in it." Those words reflected not only his career, but his philosophy of life. Colleagues remember him as gentle and deeply thoughtful. In his lab at the University of Cambridge, he was known for his patience and generosity toward young researchers. "He never made you feel small," one former student recalled. "He made you feel that your question, no matter how small, could matter to the world." His office was modest. No grand decorations, just books, papers, and the quiet hum of scientific instruments. He worked late into the evenings, driven by curiosity rather than recognition. Friends say he never sought fame. For him, discovery was its own reward. When news of his passing spread, tributes came from across the globe. The University of Cambridge released a statement calling him a visionary who transformed our understanding of life's potential. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak described him as a national treasure whose mind reshaped modern medicine. On social media, young scientists and doctors shared how his research had inspired them. "He made the impossible seem possible," one post read. "Because of him, we believe that healing and renewal are not just dreams, they are science." Those close to him say that even in his later years, Gurdon remained deeply curious. He continued to lecture, guide students, and attend seminars. He often spoke softly, with the calm authority of someone who understood both the beauty and limits of human knowledge. "You never truly finish learning," he once said. "You just get better at asking questions." His humility was legendary. Despite his global recognition, he preferred to be called simply John. When students addressed him as Sir, he would smile and gently correct them. To him, titles didn't matter, ideas did. Beyond the lab, he enjoyed simple pleasures: gardening, reading, and spending time with his wife, Jean. They shared a quiet life, filled with the same patience and care that defined his work. Friends described him as kind-hearted and always ready with a word of encouragement. In interviews, Gurdon often reflected on how curiosity had guided him through doubt. "If something seems impossible," he said, "that's usually where you should start." That belief not only drove his scientific breakthroughs, but also inspired generations to follow their own questions. No matter how unconventional, his passing marks the end of an era in biology, a time when discovery meant long hours, handmade tools, and the courage to challenge accepted truths. But his influence continues in every stem cell lab, in every new therapy born from his vision, even now. As medicine explores ways to regenerate organs and cure chronic diseases, it traces its roots back to his early experiments with frogs in a quiet Oxford lab. His work showed that science could not only explain life, but also rewrite it, giving humanity new power over health and healing. In the halls of Cambridge, candles were lit in his honor. Students paused by the entrance of the Gurdon Institute, the research center that bears his name. The silence there spoke volumes, a moment of gratitude for a man who devoted his life to understanding life itself. One colleague summed it up simply: "John taught us that the smallest cell can hold the biggest secret, and that patience can change the world." As evening fell over the university town he loved, the light from his legacy continued to shine, in every experiment that challenges the impossible, in every young scientist who dares to dream, Sir John Gurdon will be remembered not just as a Nobel laureate, but as a symbol of perseverance, a man who proved that curiosity, when guided by humility and hope, can literally reverse the course of time. And in that quiet, enduring truth, his story will live on, not just in textbooks or laboratories, but in the hearts of all who believe that the power to change the world begins with a single question.